afternoon. Hello. I'm Veronica Enriquez. I direct the Chicano Studies Research Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first Camarillo lecture series. I want to start with the land acknowledgement. So the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. Today, I'm so delighted to welcome Dr. Carlos Vélez-Ibáñez. He is a Regents professor at the School of Transborder Studies and also at the School of Human Evolution and Social Change at Arizona State University. He is an alum of UCLA. He was a professor of UCLA. He was an assistant professor, one of the first, if not the first, in anthropology. So it's really an honor to have him here. He will present the talk, The Rise of Necro Narco Flexible Superstate Network from Tucson to Tapachula and Their Cultural and Behavioral Consequences. This lecture is the first in a series made possible by Dr. Camarillo, UCLA alum and known Jr. Memorial Professor Emeritus of History at Stanford University. With his generous gift, the CSRC will host lectures that explore the Latinx experience. I would really like to thank Dr. Camarillo for establishing this important series at the CSRC and for his consistent support of the Chicano Studies Research Center and UCLA more broadly. We will now get a longer introduction from my predecessor, Chon Noriega, who directed the center for almost 2 decades and who has done incredible work here at UCLA and beyond. He is a professor of film here at UCLA.
Thank you, Veronica, and welcome everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our inaugural speaker for the Albert M. Camarillo Lecture at UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center. First, we are honored to have Professor Camarillo here with us today, and we are grateful for his leadership and support in establishing this annual lecture. As you've heard, Al is the Leon Sloss Jr. Memorial Professor Emeritus at Stanford University. His book, Chicanos in a Changing Society from Mexican Pueblos to American Barrios, published by Harvard University Press in 1979, was a key text in the founding of Chicano studies and a much-needed corrective to American historiography. Al has received numerous recognitions for his research, teaching, and equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. But most important of all, Al is a true blue and gold Bruin. Born and raised in Compton, he entered UCLA as a freshman in 1966, and he left as a PhD in 1975 to start his career at Stanford. This is the period in which CSRC was envisioned, fought for, and established. And Al and his cohort of Chicano and Chicana students at UCLA are why we are here today. Thank you all. Now, this annual lecture series was established in 2019 to showcase new scholarship that explores the Latino experience. At the time, we had an O. So back then, we quickly identified Carlos Vélez-Ibáñez as our inaugural speaker, and we eagerly scheduled a lecture for spring 2020. And here we are today, 3 years and 1 global pandemic later. Thank you for your patience, Carlos. Now, Carlos's planned lecture at that time has now been published as a book, Reflections of a Transborder Anthropologist from Netzahualcoyotl to Aztlán. But we are very fortunate that Carlos has prepared another acclaimed lecture for us. Now, in case you think I'm joking, when I asked Carlos for a draft of his new lecture, he sent me 143 pages. I see he's cut it in half here, so. Needless to say, Carlos's academic record is extraordinary, and there is no way I can do justice to his achievements and impact over the last 5 decades. Like Al, Carlos received a PhD in 1975, but in anthropology at UC San Diego, joining the faculty at UCLA in 1976. He was tenured in 1982, and promptly left to the University of Arizona, Tucson, where he held several leadership roles and also founded the Bureau of Applied Research in Anthropology. In 1994, Carlos joined the faculty at UC Riverside, serving as the Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. Carlos also, at the same time, served as interim chair of the Department of Ethnic Studies and as director of the Ernesto Galarza Applied Research Center. In 2005, after 40 years as a professor, Carlos retired from UC Riverside. And then his career began in earnest. Carlos next served 10 years as the founding director of the School of Transborder Studies at Arizona State University. This wide-ranging interdisciplinary school is the only one of its kind that focuses on the U.S.-Mexico transborder region, as well as the Latinx population across the U.S. He has also raised a lot of money in the process, making possible a wide range of research and educational access programs. Now, needless to say, the multiple demands of academic leadership have impacted his publication record. Just kidding. Carlos has published 6 books on Chicano and Mexican origin and Mexican communities with respect to cultural systems, cultural change, the economics of mutual trust, and language. The latter subject takes a broad historical perspective, looking at what he calls the hegemonies of language in the U.S. Southwest since 1540. 3 of these books have been translated into Spanish, one of them by Carlos himself. He has also edited 6 anthologies and has published nearly 70 articles. I'm happy to say 3 of them in CSRC's own Islamic Journal of Chicano Studies. His work is ambitious in subject matter, scope of research, and methodology. It is rigorous within the context of his primary field, but also with respect to the other disciplinary approaches he brings into the conversation. And it is soulful, committed, and self-reflexive, but also finely attuned to the term phrase that can make in-depth, complex, and difficult research mean something in the world. His award-winning 1996 book, Border Visions, The Culture of Mexicans in the Southwest, is stunning in its reach across social and sciences and humanities. He even writes about the arts. But it is his phrase, the distribution of sadness, in his book that makes crystal clear the impact of cultural, political, and economic systems and their interplay on the Mexican descent people in the United States. The phrase still haunts me as much as it did in 1996 because it remains true for an even more diverse and larger population in the United States, including Central American and Oaxacan, that are dismissed for speaking non-English, singing non-English. Now, these phrases, speaking non-English, singing non-English, were the captions put up for Bad Bunny's performance at the Grammys broadcast recently. I urge you to read Yarimar Bonilla's excellent op-ed in the New York Times today. She is a political anthropologist and director of our sister center at Hunter College, El Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños. But I digress. Carlos, before you come up here, I want to thank you for agreeing to give our first Albert and Camarillo lecture. But I also want to thank you for your support and encouragement of others, something that is as exemplary and extensive as your many academic achievements. I want to recognize you for your tireless care and commitment in the face of an ongoing distribution of sadness. You lead and you mentor by example. Now, we first met around 1996 when I visited you at UC Riverside. I entered your dean's office, and there you were at your desk. The few things on your desk were meticulously in place, and you were sitting bolt upright. I was an assistant professor, but you treated me like a visiting dignitary. I told you that the only other desk I'd ever seen like yours was my father's office desk. He was a high school graduate, committed to social justice, and devilishly smart. But he got a sense of discipline to make a difference in the U.S. Army. I ventured that you too must have served in the Army. We chuckled briefly, then said, U.S. Marine Corps. What can I say? I'm glad you're on our side. You have received all the major honors, including election to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences last year. But I'm thrilled that the most recent honor you have listed on your mind-boggling CV is the following: Albert Camarillo Lecture, The Rise of the Necro Narco Flexible Superstate Network from Tucson to Tapachula and their Cultural and Behavioral Significance, UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center, February 13, 2023. This honor won't be your last, but it is our first. We are grateful to have you here with us today at UCLA. Please join me in welcoming Carlos Vélez-Ibáñez to the program.
After that introduction, I can't fail. I wanted to share with you something that perhaps many of you wouldn't know. And that is the only reason that I've been relatively, quote-unquote, successful in the academy. I owe completely to Juan Gomez and the Chicano Studies Research Center. Because, in fact, it was Juan Gomez who recruited me from USC to UCLA during the antediluvian period. And in fact, it was his assistance that I go over from USC to come to UCLA. And so for 5 years, I drudged and worked, but I never have had so much fun in my entire life than I had when I was here. Because I used to live in San Pedro and commute from San Pedro to UCLA. And during that time, of course, my most memorable memories had to do on Friday on payday. Friday on payday meant that, in fact, we would all, both graduate students like Alberto and Chicano faculty, the 4 or 5 of us that were around here, would then retire to the Fiscal and watch Valenzuela pitch for the LA Dodgers. And all of these are, of course, the fond memories that I've always regarded as so special. So UCLA has been, from my particular point of view, the jumping off point. And the year that I earned tenure here, I did leave. And I was called in, as a matter of fact, by the then Chancellor Ray Orbach, who lived with the Chancellor, Superstate, who asked me, well, why are you leaving? Just earned tenure. I said, that's why I'm leaving. And he sputtered for a while, and he said, no, I understand. So UCLA, I've always had a great deal of fondness and kind memories, as well as difficult ones. Because in fact, I was the first Mexican to be hired by the Department of Anthropology. And an awful lot of us were regarded as the natives of the institution. So we did acquire a reputation for being rather tough, all of us, and did not respond kindly to unkindness. And we let them go as well. So that, in fact, as I shared with Veronica earlier on, my first day at UCLA as an assistant professor, I was visited by the then director, or the chair of the department. And he came in and he said to me, boy, he called me boy. And of course, should I put it to you, in my own mind, I said to myself in Spanish, pero tengo que hacer una de las dos cosas, o le pego un fregazo a este tipo de la patada, or let me listen to see maybe if I can learn something from this guy. And I did. That's what he said. Boy, this is the first time and last time I'm going to talk to you. You know? He says, if you want to stick around here, this is what you have to do. You have to turn your dissertation into a book. And then you've got to write a second book, not from a theme or idea that's different from your first book. And I want 5 peer-reviewed articles. And then he turned around and walked away, and he said, this is the first time and the last time I'm going to talk to you. And that's the way it was. But I learned something, and that is 5 years later, I had 2 books and 5 peer-reviewed articles as well. So, this is a difficult lecture to do. It's a difficult lecture to do because most of my work has always involved trying to relate and to narrate what we knew to be true. And let me tell you what I mean by what we knew to be true. For us, during my period of gestation as an assistant professor, and before that, of course, as a graduate student, most of the literature regarded the Mexican population as a secondary one, to say the least. It regarded it as a population to be admired for its brawn, but eliminated and dismissed for its brains. We were basically treated as an ahistorical population. And so for my generation and for generations following, our task came to be, in fact, the task of really relating what we knew to be true. Because here you have these stereotypes of this population, and when I knew, but in fact it was just the opposite. That is, we were a hardworking, very smart, and accomplished population, but never recognized. We were, in fact, almost invisible. And if it hadn't been for people like Camarillo writing about us, and others of my generation and our generation, who in fact opened up those knowledge doors. And that was really the basis for our involvement in what we were writing about as well as what we were researching. But this particular work here is very difficult to do because, in fact, it is less positive than the other ones that I've been doing. And as a matter of fact, from my particular point of view, and Chon mentioned the term the distribution of sadness, and in this particular case, this is a transborder distribution of sadness. So let me begin with the following. 30 years ago, Michael Carney published his important essay, Borders and Boundaries of State and Self at the End of Empire. In that essay, he provides us with theoretically complex arguments about nationalism, the nation-state, transnationalisms, ethnicity, and anthropology in the context of contemporary capitalism. Mostly focused on as he says, quote, on the decline of the unit as the United States empire experiencing its decline in spatial and symbolic distinction between itself and its dependencies, unquote. But as importantly, on the spatial separation of the site of the purchase and expenditure of labor, and thus the national separation of the sites of production and reproduction. Kearney provided us with a sense of the multiple contradictions inherent in such a condition. It is my contention that in the 30 years since his insightful article appeared, the important reliance on military processes, both legal and extra-legal, by the United States and Mexico have led to the emergence of intense and continuous militarized United Statesian and Mexican Necro, narco, flexible transnational superstate networks. This emerging superstate network functions as a primary transnational phenomenon of control, surveillance, suppression, exploitation, and violence against inhabitants from southwestern United States, from Tucson to southern Mexico, Tapachula, Chiapas, and beyond in both directions. The result, I would argue, are produced profound social dislocations of populations, constrictions of civil freedoms, and the development of warrior cultural formations stimulated by an expansive militarization and historical participation in American wars. This is all introductory. The signs and actualities of such an emergence includes intensive militarization and adoption of high-tech weapons of war among U.S. boundary enforcers. This weaponry includes night vision equipment, drones, all-terrain vehicles, mobile border surveillance posts, and many other military-grade weapons of war. The most recent addition to the enforcer's arsenal is the military-grade robo-dogs made by Ghost Robotics, initially designed to be deployed in the Arizona-Sonora boundary area. The quadruped autonomous robots are strong, fast, can upright themselves, and can be armed. Additionally, they operationally and culturally neutralize human emotion and empathy, both necessary for military-level doing and thinking. Enforcers view the robo-dogs as potential force multipliers in boundary control along the Mexico-U.S. boundary area. Over the past decade, U.S. state made enormous expenditures in support of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The department's 5-year average for 2017-2021 in the following categories is displayed in Table 1. Now, I'm not going to go through each one, but you can see for yourself a quite impressive number of individuals, number of federal employees, 211,000 for Homeland Security, number of contracting employees, number of active opportunities, among annual contract obligations, a 5-year average of $18.2 billion. Total between 2017 and 2021, that's a 4-year period, of $91 billion. These funding allocations have created thousands of quasi-military control agents and specialized multiple units of the Border Patrol, averaging 20,000 over 10 years, slightly smaller than the 1st Marine Division. By 2022, this increased to over 25,000 officers, half of whom are of Mexican origin or Latinx. Out of the entire force, approximately a third are military veterans. There's a strong push, especially to hire Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. Its administrative and operational locus for permanent and moving militarized checkpoints on U.S. soil utilize quote-unquote low-intensity warfare, unquote. Policies extending to Central America. The boundary space is buttressed by the system of internal and boundary enforcement apparatuses controlled by the Department of Homeland Security and militarized communication networks linking local, state, national, and international policing agencies. These are augmented and made possible by the transformation of the desert regions as funnels of death to prevent border crossings. This death corridor is supported by weaponization of the region with the most advanced, quote-unquote, low-intensity technologies and arms, and the assignment of military units as well as special border patrol units as operational control and intervention forces. The border wall is the militarized line of departure, and the COVID-19 pandemic has provided greater impetus to these agents for enforcement, particularly the power to exclude potential health threats under Section 265 of the U.S. Code, Title 42. The combined militarized policies and practices from all agents, south and north, have impacted the daily lives of many on both sides of the border. These encompass from human dislocations or unraveling of civil authority in towns and cities to violence and violent death. The narco web and continuum includes a wholesale violation of legal and juridical rights of residents on both sides of the political imaginary. These phenomena, as I will illustrate, have given rise to two cultural identities. One side consists of Necro citizenry and the other of narco citizenry. The former is marked in the U.S. by a penchant towards symbolically and politically identifying with militarized symbols, rituals, and behaviors, as well as political positions. Narco citizenry of the Mexican region state is defined by equivalent manifestations of militarization of varying expressions, as well as creates parallel political and authority-controlled spaces to existing civil and political regimes with profound cultural impact. These are all manifested by the rise of the Mexican military as an almost standalone institution, budgetarily, as well as giving enormous public work tasks that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. As well, the U.S. supplies billions of dollars in narcotics control, direct military assistance, military education and non-proliferation, anti-terrorism and related programs totaling $560 billion between 2017 and 2021. South of the boundary line, there also exists a marked militarization and the emergence of narco citizenship. Drug cartels, for example, successfully integrated former Mexican Army Special Forces and tactics, that I'm going to talk about a little bit more as we continue. This presentation then does not encompass the breadth of issues that Carney confronted, but instead seeks a narrow scope to analyze these phenomena. From my point of view, they may be considered another rosary for this late, most tardy stage of postmodern capitalism. As you can see then, these are quite important statistics. Since the conquest of Mexico by the United States in the 19th century, The border region has been characterized by a complex and unequal system of integrated transnational economic modalities of labor, agricultural, mining, construction, trade, and migration from Mexico to the United States, with mirrored process in the Mexican border region. This relationship is exacerbated by economic downturns, and this inequality is expressed by authorized and unauthorized migration of Mexican labor to the United States and policies of hidden, quote-unquote, elasticity of labor. These are what I would suggest are academic rationales for just bringing as many folks for as long as you need them, and then when you don't need them, you pick them out. In contradiction to the latter, periodic expulsions, draconian labor laws, and racist tropes often are visited on Mexican origin communities. Yet these do not fully excise U.S. employers' desire to improvement of Mexican labor. Especially since 9/11 security concerns have created low-intensity conflict, measures ostensibly focused on homeland security and drug trafficking. The post-9/11 paranoia also created a transborder political and operational network, a Necro state, in the U.S. focused on Mexican transborder labor and drug interdictions and policies. So there are cultural and social compensations for all of this, and I would suggest in terms of the Necro state, the importance of dying and theorizing and belonging. There are highly contradictory phenomena that have emerged since the Texas Revolt, and that is the Mexican origin populations fighting for, supporting, and dying in American wars. Such action functions as sort of compensation for rejection as another, by participating in every American conflict to show their loyalty, and that certainly begins from the Confederate Civil War, from the American Civil War of the 19th century into the present. This itself, by participating in every American conflict to show their loyalty, but importantly, their legitimate presence in the United States. Ironically, this itself is a recent creation by former colonial subjects and following generations of European immigrants. Meanwhile, the present militarization of the southern U.S. border region has resulted in checkpoints, raids, and usurpation of civil rights of many of its populations in public opposition and disapproval. Nevertheless, congruent to and a kind of elaborated defense mechanism has emerged of accentuating military service, repeated patriotic rituals, and more importantly, being part of overrepresented casualty rates in all wars since World War II, serve as the empirical support for its Necro citizenry. This, of course, is also reflected in the overrepresentation of Mexican origin populations in the ranks of the Border Patrol, with a large segment being veterans. So you can see that this whole process of what I call Necro citizenship has been a process that's been long created. And when we look at, just 1 second. But Diaz-Barriga and Dorsey, who most insightfully amplified this concept to the U.S.-Mexican border zone case by showing, quote, the normalization of militarism and military engagement within Mexican-American culture. They differentiate between patriotic citizenship and a dialogic manner with Necro citizenship to explore its signification for an other population. And the final analysis, from my point of view, although extolled as a patriotic virtue, has resulted in an abundant overrepresentation of this population in American wars, regardless of virtues and loyalty and fidelity. Thus, within the context of the border region and beyond, death as a tool of commission is integrated to patriotic citizenship as Negro citizenry as a total process. It is also masked by truisms that is confounding and emotionally stirring simultaneously, coupled to recognition and unothering while dying. And of course, for our purpose, the state apparatus funded by citizen taxes and contributions make possible a powerful apparatus to conduct the action necessary to implement practices, making up aspects of Necro citizenry and often exemplified through reasoned pitches and reasonable and sometimes mythical rationalization. These are repeating constructs like, quote-unquote, protecting our borders, safeguarding jobs, eliminating foreign workers, and their unfair competition, sometimes in the guise of medical rationales of maintaining cleanliness and free of infection of the others. Thus, actions resulting can be innocently portrayed as only offering protection to legal citizens and safe spaces for children to grow and prosper by keeping out the brown borders. And of course, the use of the fear created by the utilization of repeated tropes, like invasion, out of control, amassing, erasing of the border, and so on. All explored and analyzed by, for example, very well by Bill Chavez in his various contributions. And these, of course, provide layers of emotional energy to sustain Necro citizenry. Thus, the concept is double-faced and hydra-hidden. Finally, there's another crucial element that accentuates Necro citizenry from the point of view of the state actions to construct walls and borders, concomitantly re-border state sovereignty, as Diaz-Barriga and Dorsey have significantly noted. This is accomplished by extending the legalized use of surveillance, violence, fence, and repression prior to and beyond its concertina line, as you see in the very first slide. And 20-foot border walls with slicing capacities. We can think of the walls as part of the expression of the development and creation of Necro state processes expressed and manifested through public cultural mediums. Thus, in its border patrol strategy, as you will see, the second core element emphasizes low-intensity tactics of interdiction, while the third element further accentuates the rebordering process using interior checkpoints and in-country raids specifically centered on migrants. So their strategy is declared, rearticulates its historical roles by reference to past operations designed to block access by any means necessary. In its statement, and it's an opening statement, the new, quote, the new national strategy embraces and builds upon elements of Operation Gatekeeper. Some of you remember Operation Gatekeeper. And hold the line. However, it goes beyond the deterrent strategy embodied in these operations, and it is more than a strategy of just the southwest border, unquote. This comes directly from Border Patrol statement. It further elaborates that through its a low-intensity warfare series of tactics that emphasize command, control, interdiction, penetrating operational actions, and coordination of actions and operations. And just to give you a sense of the intensity of this entire process, this is, in fact, a compilation made by the Border Patrol of 1 day of activities by the Border Patrol. 1 day. And if you look at this chart, and I'm not going to go through all of this in any way, shape, or form, just look on a typical day, these are the activities that Customs and Border Patrol involve themselves in. And if you just look at the very first one, in 1 day process, 650,000 passengers and pedestrians, almost 70,000 incoming international air passengers and so on. And then all of the rest of these will give you then an idea of the way in which the Border Patrol acts on a daily basis. But take a look at the last set of categories. Deployed,